The idea that the ACC is in a rocky spot is not foreign to anybody. What are the odds, though, that a Louisville is in the Big 12 within a year? This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Louisville crossover.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Louisville crossover. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. That is Dalton Pence of Locked On Louisville. Thanks for making our shows your first listen every single day. Today, we will talk about the Cards being a Big 12 team if the ACC dies, as well as how Louisville fans would approach that, whether they would hate the move or love the move in an option where the Atlantic Coast Conference does not exist. Dalton, to jump right into it, Florida State, Clemson are both suing the ACC, and now the Attorney General's office in Florida is doing the exact same. The future looks bleak for the conference as a whole. Where do you sit when you think about the livelihood of a league that's right now in the Power Four, but many are predicting won't exist soon?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're starting to see where this ship is going down the waters. Louisville fans are sort of unanimous in the whole wanting to be proactive before things get too bad. Like, you don't want it to become too big of a competitive disadvantage, because let's be honest, it will. It's already becoming so, and it will only continue to increase that. So at this point, I mean, I hate to say that we're in wait and see approach, because it almost feels like we're not even in that. It's almost like we're staring down what is eventually a slippery slope that who knows the timeline, but a lot of Louisville fans are wanting the university to make a move sooner rather than later, so we're not caught in a really bad position.
Does it feel like then, you look at the Pac-12 and where even a Utah was. Now, they lucked out. They get to go to the Big 12, stay alive, at least in the power conference. That's how I would say lucked out. But the Washington States, they latched onto the Titanic and went down with it. For the ACC, if Clemson and Florida State are gone, which they both intend to do so, does that kill the conference total, or can a university like Louisville save this thing and completely nullify a conversation like this?
I mean, I love the University of Louisville with all my heart. I'm from the city. I graduated from U of L, but the answer is no. Even if they could, they would need a significant amount of help externally. I think ultimately I am one of the people that believes to have an ACC that can, coincide with the SEC and Big Ten, you have to get a commitment from Notre Dame, and you have to get that commitment moving forward from Florida State and Clemson. The impending lawsuits, it seems like the writing is on the wall. So if right when we're at the tip of the iceberg now, once that, first shoe drops, I think all pandemonium is going to really, really break out. So as much as I would love to see the ACC stay in put, I would love to, see what Cal and SMU bring, but ultimately it's probably not much in the grand scheme of things. So you would have to get, you'd have to make sure that there is some consistency and teams stay, but you'd also have to get that big football commitment, keyword on football, from Notre Dame. I just don't see it happening. It feels like everything that we feel like is going to happen, it's just inevitable.
What's interesting to me, Dalton, is you can go and Google Louisville to the Big 12 and find articles dating back 10 years ago, articles from when Louisville was even a Big East team and the odds that they would land in this conference back when Texas, Oklahoma, even A&M were here. Today, that conversation has shifted for more so of a Louisville moving up to where is the life raft? When you look at a university, and from our perspective as Big 12 analysts and fans, this is a great move. This is a top 30 revenue-generating athletic department. When basketball is up, when football is up, this is a top 25 revenue-generating department and would be top 5 in the Big 12. When you think Louisville as a Big 12 team, does that make sense in your head? Because those whispers have been going on for 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. I'm glad that you mentioned it. Before the Cardinals joined the ACC, I'd say the majority, if not all the fan base, felt that a move to the Big 12 with West Virginia was going to pretty much make sense. I mean, sure, Louisville had that one season in the American Athletic Conference, but a lot of people thought that it was ultimately going to be the Big 12 and ACC, well, that move sort of fell apart at the very end. Cardinals joined the ACC. I can definitely see it. It makes a lot of sense, Drake. Ultimately, it probably makes more sense for Louisville to join the Big 12 than it does the Big 10 and the SEC on a couple of different fronts for both sort of sides of the equation. A lot of Louisville fans might not necessarily want to hear that, but that's not only the most likely and probably the move that would make the most sense for the university going forward.
When you view the Big 12, and I know we're going to talk about almost the pessimistic devil's advocate side of the Cardinals being a Big 12 team, as well as the always rosy side at the very end. But when you view the Big 12 objectively, what do you see where it stands with 16 teams and brands like Colorado and Utah being added in?
I mean, it feels like it's doing what it can to stay as relevant in the same conversation as the SEC and the Big 10.
Yeah.
And the only way that you're really going to be able to do that is you feel like the Big Ten and the SEC are going to have their choice of who they want to add, whether it's, 2 schools each or whatever that looks like. Big 12 has to then come in and say, okay, who are they not going to get? Let me scoop those teams up, the best of the rest, and sort of putting pride to the side and making it to where it's still a respectable league. And there's no diss to the Big 12 because I wish the ACC would have done that years ago and began to start, implementing that procedure, but they ultimately didn't. And it feels like adding Cal and SMU and Stanford feels like too little too late. So I like what the Big 12 is doing. They're adding teams to where you look at the conference as a whole. Basketball, they probably still are going to be the best basketball conference for the next half decade, maybe even decade, with Kansas, Houston. I mean, all the schools in there. And then football, you have the respectable schools as well, to where you stay relevant. So if Louisville were to join the Big 12, I mean, it's a home run addition, honestly, for both parties.
I think so. That's where, in my view of where the ACC is, the ESPN contract likely won't be extended past 2027 because Clemson and Florida State are two very powerful properties in that conversation. Yeah. If they're gone, there isn't as much value there. And also with that, when those two cogs are pulled out from underneath you and the leg you stand on is SMU paying to get in and Cal and Stanford on the West Coast in the Atlantic Coast Conference, it feels too rocky to keep it there. So my prediction is that by 2027, Louisville, as well as maybe a Virginia Tech or a wish list Miami, is a Big 12 school. I think by 2027, that's a conversation we're having. Dalton, how likely is it, just as you see it today, that Louisville is in this conference by then?
Well, I think at this point, everyone's waiting to see, like the ACC schools are sort of waiting to see what Florida State and Clemson do. I would hope, because I don't have any inside information, because, the athletic administration keeps everything fairly close to the chest. And this stuff is, there's a lot of hearsay. You say, oh, well, Louisville wants to, there's a rumor out there right now that Louisville is doing the best that they can to get into the SEC. Somebody asked me if it was true, and I'm like, probably. Why would you not be trying to get into the SEC? But I think that there are hurdles to get into the conference. They have the choice of who they want to. Big Ten, a lot of it feels like an academic level of decision as well. Louisville's not really known for their academics. So, like I said, Big 12 seems like the likely destination. Like, it would not surprise me in 5 years if they're, renewing some of their old Big East rivalries in the Big 12. But at this point, nothing has gone on. But once a decision is made in court with Florida State and Clemson, you're going to see all the ACC schools trying to frantically make a move and bring to light publicly what they're probably already doing back channeling.
Yeah. I get that in conference realignment, even for a school that's been in the ACC for, just over a decade here, like it hasn't been that long that Louisville has been able to say we're a power conference team. And now they're already talks of moving again. I see there's a downside to that. Let's go to the downside next on Locked On Big 12, Locked On Louisville, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Look, Game Time is where I go to get my tickets all the time. I love going to concerts. It's one of my favorite things in the world. But the thing is like, I don't really want to pay a lot of money to go to the concert. So what do? I get the last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed at gametime.com/lockdown, where if you go there right now, you get $20 off. You're going to an MLB game. Great. if that ticket, if like, okay, the MLB team that you're going to see sucks, well, then maybe tickets are cheap and that $20 off could get you just like free MLB tickets. Also, there's a little toggle option where I can see the all-in price for my tickets. So like I go to another ticket site and I say, oh, $50 tickets, great. And I go to check out and it's $157. Why? I don't know. They like to haggle you. Game Time doesn't do that. GameTime.co/locked on is where you go. Download the Game Time app today. Use code locked on is where you go to get that $20 off. Game Time, lowest prices, the best seats. You buy them last second to get the flash deal of your life at Game Time. Download the app today. Dalton, the idea that Louisville goes to the Big 12. I see why fans would hate it. Look, the SEC's out there, the Big Ten's out there, and Louisville's a valuable athletic department, top 30 in the country. What is the downside to having the Cardinals as a Big 12 member?
Well, there's the fear that the SEC and the Big Ten are ultimately going to pull away from the other conferences. And I mean, there's so many hypotheticals that are bouncing around out there to where, you know, from a revenue sharing standpoint, it feels like, you know, you're going to have your cream of the crop with the SEC and the Big Ten, and they view the Big 12. Now, I'll be, you know, pretty honest here. There's not a lot of opposition to the Big 12, but one of the main things that I guess you would hear from the opposition would be the mainstream revenue service sort of being the same and not up to par with the SEC and the Big Ten. So potentially some competitive disadvantage when it comes to recruiting, NIL budget, you name it.
Lateral move. It would be, in essence, from a value standpoint, as things sit, a lateral move for Louisville to go to the Big 12 as the ACC exists currently with Clemson and Florida State. Obviously, without them, your revenue goes down a ton. College Football Playoff Committee, giving the SEC and the Big 10 double, in essence, what they are giving the Big 12, is not that enticing. I'll play that fiddle for you. When you hear lateral move, or Louisville fans hear lateral move, does that register as still a safe or equitable move, or do you want the flashy sexy? Do you need the flashy sexy Big 10?
I mean, you would love the flashy sexy Big 10. You would love the flashy sexy SEC as well. And I think if you put them side by side, it's a matter of, okay, which conference is going to be respectable enough and be relevant enough? I keep coming back to this term relevant, and that is 100% the key, because one thing that you don't want, as much of advancements have been made from the football side of things over the past couple of decades, none of that really matters about tradition, history. Same with basketball. It's like when Louisville, no disrespect to the American Athletic Conference, but when Louisville was in that conference for the 1 year, it wasn't as revered as it is now. And it's even still not, you know, thought of in that high of a rank. But when they were there in 2013, 2014, Drake, I'll paint the picture. Louisville was 5th in the AP poll in basketball.
Yep.
The main knock on them was 100% straight to schedule. People didn't take the AAC seriously. They won every game in the conference tournament by, I think, an average of like 25 points. It was nuts. They beat UConn that year 3 times by an average of 30 points each time. Nuts. They win the conference tournament, 58 in the AP poll. They get a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. So if there's any fan base out there that's currently in a Power 5 conference that understands how this sort of disrespect factors in, I feel like Louisville's right there when it comes to understanding. So even if you can't get into the SEC or Big Ten, and it's likely you probably don't, barring something unforeseen, which can happen, you want to be in the conference that gives you the best chance to be relevant. Yeah. And it feels like the Big 12 is making those advancements. ACC, I'm sorry, but California, SMU, and Stanford feels like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole.
I want everybody listening to just, like, sobering moment here. I asked Dalton off the air to give me a segment playing devil's advocate of why you wouldn't go to the Big 12, and somehow we have wound up toward the Big 12 is making advancements that would be nice for Louisville to be part of. So that is the sentiment here amongst ACC teams that feel as though they might not have a home in a year's time. So then, Dalton, I'm going to force you now to give me a downside to the Big 12. What is the downside? And in essence, is it the fact the ACC falls apart? I mean, is Louisville just happy where they are?
That's the main thing I keep coming back to, Drake, is that like the ACC is like on thin ice to where even if the Big 12 even if the advancements weren't as prevalent, there's not much of an opposition I could give you because of the state of the ACC. Let's say that, I don't even know at this point who you could add, but let's say that, I don't know, let's play the devil's advocate, and let's say ACC goes out and gets UConn.
Okay.
And they look a little bit better in terms of basketball because UConn's back-to-back national champions. They start to take football a little bit more serious. You have women's basketball. Let's say one of Clemson or Florida State stays. Can't see that happening, but we're playing devil's advocate here, so I'm bringing out all the hypotheticals. Because the only way that I can justify this is if something or some things, multiple, go in the favor of the ACC. You have to have, number one, I think the success, the near-term success of the football teams, the ACC, it has to be good. You have to have teams make the playoffs because it's all recency bias. And adding a team like UConn, keeping one of those two teams, making sure Miami stays in place.
Yep.
Getting something worked out to where you keep Notre Dame in, even if it's not for football, you keep them in for the other sports and let them stay independent in football. There's so much that has to go right for the Atlantic Coast Conference that it feels like foolish to even talk about it. And I'm not saying that the ACC is going to disband tomorrow, but I'm looking 5 years down the road.
Yep.
I don't want Louisville in a conference that gets, yeah, you're 11-1 in that conference. I mean, we just saw Florida State go 13-0, and it did not matter.
Yep.
So Jordan Travis or no Jordan Travis, we've never seen that. So it's only going to get worse. Don't kid yourself. This is not getting better. This is a sinking ship. You have to be proactive and get on one of the lifeboats now.
Love it. Dalton, we'll be the lifeboat. Hi, pick us, please. Coming up, what makes the Big 12 then the best option? Is it the regional rivalry with a West Virginia or a Cincinnati being close? And how does a Louisville Big 12 merger add to both entities? This is Locked On Big 12, Locked On Louisville, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Look, FanDuel is the place that I go when I just need to make money. Like, hey, it's the first of the month, paying my rent. And I look back and I say, FanDuel was fairly good to me this year because I love MLB strikeout props. Cole Reagans is pitching. You don't know who that is? I don't know who that is. But I go in and I say, he usually has 9 strikeouts, but they have an over under 6.5. What do? I say over, and FanDuel pays me. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks. You don't watch hockey? That's fine. I have a guy who calls me and says, hey, pick Wayne Gretzky to have 3 goals tonight. I don't even know what that means. I just do it. And FanDuel's right there for me to coddle. All on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. FanDuel.com/locked on to make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Today's show is also brought to you by Monopoly Go. Monopoly Go is where I go because I'm a very competitive person. People tell me all the time, Drake, you're too competitive. We don't want to be your friend. And I say, that's fine because I can go on Monopoly Go and just win. If I'm number 1, do you need friends? The answer is still yes. Right now, Monopoly Go has unique stickers you can trade with a friend to compete for albums and big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or rob their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels like a new and exciting everyday adventure with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton to include in their mini games, and there are new timed events to help you win big, like massive multipliers for every win your rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover on Monopoly Go. Get off the bench. Go download it. Google Play, Apple App Store. Game on, Monopoly Go. Dalton Pence, Locked On Louisville. We have already covered the Big 12 wants Louisville. They are a very profitable property. You have made it clear the ACC is a sinking ship and the Big 12 is a very good location to go when the Big 10 and the SEC are likely not on the table. What makes the Big 12 the perfect landing spot for Louisville from your standpoint?
There's a couple different reasons that I think we talked about. And number one is the revenue. I feel like now who knows what the revenue models are going to look like. SEC and Big 10 will be up at the very top. I imagine Big 12 will earn more than the ACC. Pete Thamel just released 2 minutes ago while we're on air recording. The leaders of college sports are involved in deep discussions to reach a legal settlement that would likely lay out the framework for sharing revenue with athletes in future NCAA business model. So again, things are happening. That whole Michael Scott meme, OMG, it's happening. Like things are going. And that's one thing, is you don't want to get caught, red-handed without a plan in place. So I think Big 12 represents sort of like a life raft. It also offers, everybody chases nostalgia, man. Like, I turned 26 last week, Drake, and I sometimes wish I was still 21. You get to 21, you're like, okay, let's stay there. Everyone chases that nostalgia. People love the old Big East rivalries. I mean, the opportunity to get to play Cincinnati every year, not to mention Scott Satterfield, West Virginia, I mean, you name it. And then playing in Allen Fieldhouse against Kansas, playing against Houston, who Louisville has played in the past in some high-profile games, and then Baylor in the what would have been Scott Drew battle.
Yeah.
But I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I think it's neat to think about, sort of like when we got into the ACC, like the idea of playing North Carolina and Duke was cool. It's new. So I think that the possibilities there give a lot of encouragement. But there's a lot of reasons why this will make sense.
To me, and again, to lay it out, the Attorney General in Florida is suing the ACC, as well as Florida State and Clemson. There's intent for the two major powers there to leave, and Notre Dame doesn't seem as though it wants part of it in football. They want to stay independent. Then what are you anchoring to? Is a Miami, a UNC, a Louisville, and can they keep things together? I don't think the answer is yes, based off of the three properties that just got brought in, not being as profitable as you want to keep the conference alive. And I want to go back to what you mentioned about revenue numbers. The ACC will make less than the Big 12 with Florida State and Clemson gone. They make more right now because those two properties are there. But the second that ESPN is able to fund the out for those two, then we're good. And if they settle in court, we've then given you a number for every school to pay. They settle out at $100 million. Then it's like, all right, well, Louisville, do you want to pay your $100 million and buy your ticket to the Big 12? And how do those conversations go? I think we're inching toward that. So Dalton, from a fan's perspective then, if tomorrow it is announced Louisville is a Big 12 school, what is the instant immediate reaction?
Let's effing go. I guess you would say, like, PG version of what I would truly say. It just makes a lot of sense, man. I've always liked the Big 12 personally. This is a biased point of view. It's year in, year out the best basketball conference over the past 5 years or so, after the ACC's reign ended. And Louisville's a big basketball school. So having sort of that Big East feel where every game was just an absolute battle, that's something that Louisville fans relish and they like, and the football is not shabby either. Like, there are some teams that can be really, really good. Now, granted, you lose Texas and Oklahoma, but the idea is that you replace them and other teams step up. Not to mention, from a competitive side of things, SEC is a war. Big Ten is a war. Louisville would have a better chance of long-term sustained success football-wise in the Big 12 than I'd rather go 9-3 in the Big 12 than 6-6 every year in the SEC. Like, I understand why my Kentucky friends out there are like, oh, we're in the SEC. You go 6-6, 7-5 every year. That cannot be fun to you.
Right.
That cannot be fun.
On good years, I should put out there. On good years, they go 7-5.
I mean, yeah, you have your occasional 10-2, and everybody throws a Super Bowl party.
Right.
But I mean, it's fun. It's meant to be fun. If we're getting our tails kicked in every single game, what's the fun in that? I understand more revenue might mean more of a competitive advantage, but the idea is that the Big 12, you have your SEC and your Big 10 right here, and the Big 12 is like right here, and the ACC and company are down here. So instant reaction, long story short, man, is let's effing go.
Yep. Dalton, as we close it out, the idea that because you're a Big 12 team, makes your school less money than the SEC and the Big 10 is never going to personally affect you. You don't get any of that money. That is one thing that I've tried to stress so much, even as a fan of a Big 12 team, is that, tomorrow when I hear that Washington's going to the Big Ten and their fan base goes, oh, well, now our revenue is going to skyrocket. You're not going to see that. You don't get the money. You're just going to a conference where you might get dropped in football. Louisville in the Big 12. Is it more money than the ACC? Yes. And you're going to have a damn good time watching the football team play on Saturdays against Texas Tech, Arizona, or Oklahoma State. That, to me, makes it all worth it. Even if the money's not there, it's probably not going to affect you that much. That's Dalton Pence from Locked On Louisville. Dalton, any closing thoughts?
Last thing I would say is that it feels like, Louisville is in a weird geographical area. Like, it's not in the north. It's not in the south. It's really not even in the Midwest. It's sort of in that little small pocket of what we consider to be the Ohio Valley.
Yep.
Like, I don't know what it is, but for me, like, people don't think of Louisville as the South. So SEC sort of feels forced. Now, this is just completely just off the wall. No information, just truthfully my personal thoughts. People don't think of Louisville as the South. People think Louisville as the North. I feel like the Big 12 are teams like Louisville, West Virginia,
blue collar,
Cincinnati, blue collar. There you go. That's a way to. I mean, the Kansas teams. You have the Texas teams like Baylor and Tech, Houston, Iowa State. The list goes on. Schools that it feels like Louisville like fits in with. It doesn't really. Louisville's not an academic, prestigious university. Love my university, but it's not like a prestigious Big Ten school like Northwestern, and it doesn't feel like a Southern school like an SEC team. So it just makes sense. It feels like you find your groups in school, and I'm going to sit at that lunch table over there with the Big 12.
I love it. Yay! You could have said so.
You want to sign that? Do we sign the paperwork now? Is that what the whole episode was about? Like, you were like introducing people to the nation. If this is the #1 Big 12 podcast, I expect some literature and documentation for me to sign right now, because
100%. And I have Alex Dono of Locked On Canes tomorrow talking about Miami, because they're the top of the Big 12 wish list. And I think that conversation is going to go very differently for my listeners tomorrow. That's Dalton Pence, Locked On Louisville, Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12 here. Thanks for making our show your first listen every single day. This has been, and always will be, Locked On. Again, thanks for making these your first listen every single day. Louisville and Dose Grande.